All right. I'm going to kick us off. So welcome. Really grateful to have you all here. I am Bonnie Bain. I'm the Executive Director of Salem Alliance for the Environment. SAFE has been around for over 25 years. We were founded to shut down the coal plant, and we have our fingerprints on everything sustainability and resiliency in Salem. And we've done a lot of work on the wind port. And we've been so grateful to Tufts University for their generosity and kindness as we are on that journey. I called Eric Hines out of the blue and a cold contact because I heard that he worked on port electrification in New Bedford. And he's been staying close to us ever since. We have fellows, we have wonderful students who do research with us. So we're just so grateful. And you'll hear from Dayna Cunningham later in the program. I'm just going to hand it off to a few people to provide that update for us before we get into the research. So let's have Crowley come on up. Joe, you want to explain a little bit about Crowley and who you are?
For sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Bonnie, for putting this together. Great job, as always, and thank you for the rest of the folks at SAFE. This is, this is great to just sort of keep our pulse on the industry and everything. So my name is Joe St. Pierre. I'm the manager for Crowley for the Salem offshore wind terminal, kind of the local lead with respect to the development of the terminal. Crowley is a fairly large company that originated with marine logistics, 130-year-old family-owned company, still family-owned company. They've done a lot of tremendous work, specifically within marine transportation and logistics. They've been leading most efforts with respect to every sort of new initiative that's come along with international shipping. To that point, Crowley is very heavily involved in the offshore wind effort that's happening here in the United States, and as such, we noticed the business opportunity with offshore wind, both for our marine assets and then also for our terminal development and operations. And so that is what attracted us to the parcel of land here in Salem that we refer to as the Salem Wind Terminal. And we've been working very, very hard for I've been with Crowley for 3 years, all 3 of those years working diligently to put together a construction package and also a business plan to build this terminal. That plan has changed a few times now, and we're currently at a place where we have sort of a phased approach to the project. I should have had a picture of it, but with the change in the offshore wind landscape, the full scope has been difficult to make a business case for, and so we currently are working very diligently with both partners, customers that will eventually use the terminal, but more so the folks at Mass CEC and right up to the governor's office to find a solution and a funding method to build out this terminal. So that's where we are today. Executive leadership are having these conversations all the time, more or less through the holiday. And with respect to my purview is more of the construction and operation scope. So with respect to construction, we are ready to go. I don't think I can dot any more T's or cross any more T's or dot any more I's. So we do have a contractor that has been procured, and they're also sort of chomping at the bit. So that's where we are today. I do wish I had some better news for you all, but hopefully the next time I see you in a forum like this, we'll be having a much different conversation. So thank you. I do have to leave a little early for a kid pickup, but my contact info, Bonnie, can get you guys if you have any questions. So thank you, Bonnie.
Thank you, Joe. Yep. We invited Daniel Collins from the city, our port planner. He also has some context from the city, and maybe you could share a little bit about Mass CEC in the state if you feel comfortable with that.
Yeah, so I may not be able to share too much about Mass EC, but I could share a little bit. I have more prepared remarks because I'm not the best public speaker, but I just want to say good evening, and I'm really happy to be here on behalf of the Mayor's Office and the City of Salem. I also am the Seaport and Waterfront Planner for the Salem Harbor Port Authority. Thanks, Bonnie and Safe, for bringing us together tonight and inviting the city to be part of this program. I want to also acknowledge all the residents and businesses in Salem, for the support that they have for this project. I think that's really an important point to underscore. I'm going to be a little sobering for a moment, and then I'm going to try to get away from that pretty quick. But January this year, it marked a real turning point for the country and for a lot of industries operating within it, including the offshore wind, and especially the offshore wind industry. Since then, the federal administration has effectively paused the industry. Permitting has stopped. Planning for lease areas has stopped. Existing lease areas are under review, and key federal agencies have been restructured. The goal of the administration is to shift away from supporting renewables and back towards fossil fuels. There's also a renewed focus on mineral extraction in the Outer Continental Shelf, which is where offshore wind is located. The result is that projects that were on the brink of construction, Salem, other projects like that, have been stalled out or put back on the shelf. Additionally, stop work orders have been issued up and down the East Coast, and that's cost developers hundreds of millions of dollars. And when you factor in, the potential growth that has been lost or could be lost, that is on the order of magnitude of billions of dollars. But it's not just about the energy and maritime companies, it's also about the communities like Salem, and the workers that we have in these communities, the communities themselves that are going to host this, the regional supply chain development that we were working towards, the innovation and research that we could foster through this, and the real economic benefits that we could see from these projects. So you are probably aware, Salem lost $34 million in federal financial assistance this year, and that funding was obligated towards our Salem heavy lift terminal, and it was taken, primarily because of the federal administration's opposition to offshore wind. Still, we persist. Even after the Trump administration canceled our $34 million grant, we were fortunate that our local and state leaders chose to stay the course. When we learned of this termination in late August, the Healy and Driscoll administration, Senator Lovely, our federal delegation, and Mayor Pingalo all reaffirmed their commitment, both to the offshore wind space, but also to the development of the Salem heavy lift terminal. The mayor said before, and I think it's worth repeating, that the horizon we are working towards is measured in decades, not years. With that long-range view in mind, we're exploring multiple paths forward, like Joe was talking about. That includes things like a phased build-out and potential redesign options to help address the funding loss, and temporary alternative uses that could support the operations in the meantime. And despite the headwinds that the industry is facing, a few things haven't changed. Salem's port project would support lower electricity costs, it would create hundreds of good-paying jobs, and it would give the Northeast further access to abundant renewable American energy to power a growing economy. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, and I don't think anyone's under the illusion that the federal opposition to offshore wind is going to change. But we've seen this before, and if you look at earlier port and wind projects in Massachusetts and beyond, some of them face serious setbacks. And while setbacks aren't really what we want, they're not fatal. And I guess more of a personal note, something that I found grounding recently that I also posted to Instagram today is a Gandalf the Grey quote. He said, "Despair is only for those who see the end beyond all doubt. We do not." So I think right now it's hard to see, what the end's going to look like after what we have seen this past year, but it's also been nice to see our leaders show up. That's what I got.
That was great, Daniel. Thank you. And now I'm going to invite up Dayna Cunningham, Dean Dayna Cunningham of the Tisch College of Civic Life at Tufts University. This is the only university-wide college of its kind. Tisch College studies and promotes the civic and political engagement of young people at Tufts, in our communities, and in our democracy. Dean Cunningham joined Tisch College in 2021 after a distinguished career as a civil rights lawyer and founder of the Community Innovators Lab at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Welcome, Dean Cunningham.
Good evening, everybody. It's fantastic to see so many people out for something that could be seen as a fairly technical issue that doesn't, that's hard to understand. It's just great to see so many people. So the work of Tisch College is this. It is working with communities to understand what is at stake in policies, in practices, in opportunities that are emerging or risks that are emerging due to public action. What can communities do? So it's just great to see everybody here. So we know, but let me start by saying thank you to Bridget and Sebastian and Carlos for the discussion we are about to have. A key piece of what Tisch College does is it taps into the brilliance of our students, young people, to work with communities to get at the questions that you are facing. And Bridget and Sebastian have done an amazing job, and you'll hear all about that shortly. This is a true partnership effort. I want to thank SAFE for, how many years has it been?
Eric, 3, 4?
It's been at least 4 years.
Of amazing partnership. And the city of Salem, Daniel, for the partnership we have with you, and our industry partners in the Salem Wind Port Project. I also am really excited to be joined by Professor Eric Hines and Professor Bobby Cates Garnick, and Professor Jay Borkland. I saw you come in the back. So that's our team. Our president, Sunil Kumar, has articulated a very bold vision around going beyond the walls of the university. And the way he has captured it is to say, Tufts will always do more than our fair share for the public good. And this is a really important example of that. So building on Tufts' strengths as a civically engaged, student-centered research institution, this calls on us to be an academic leader at a time when there is an urgent need for solutions to complex problems facing our economy, our environment, and communities. As I said, this is the work that Tisch College does. We cut across the various areas of the university's expertise and engage our students in real-world challenges that center community voices. So we know that one of the greatest challenges is climate change and the production and transmission of cleaner and greener forms of energy. We also know that in Salem, you all have been fighting so long for that, and it is so important that this new stage with offshore wind be a just transition. You all know that the scale and complexity of the energy transition requires coordinated research and activity across disciplines and industries. But effective and efficient technology is not enough. If we're going to invest billions in building a new energy infrastructure, then we also have a unique opportunity to build a new paradigm that responds to the environmental and social needs of communities. And that's what's so valuable about our partnership with SAFE. The type of deep and broad community engagement is not a nice to have, it is a must do if we're to address these problems. We need education on the shared project of our energy transition and the community benefits that Daniel actually talked a lot about that can be realized with this transition. We need a collaborative approach that gives communities a seat at the table, and that will be possible only if we figure out how to operationalize communication, creative problem solving, and feedback with a diverse set of communities. That's why we're so excited to be working with SAFE. It's not perfect, but it's progress, and we need this kind of progress. We need examples of the work that can be done, particularly at times like this when it is so contested and progress is blocked. But we want to continue to work with all of you all. I'm pleased to be here in Salem to be part of this briefing, and even more pleased that you're going to hear from two of the Tufts graduate students who have spearheaded this work to tell you about this in their own words. So Bridget Moynihan and Sebastian Barajas Ortiz, I want to say a little bit about them. Bridget is a PhD candidate at Tufts. Her work spans engineering studies of wind turbines and supply chains to policy solutions for the nascent offshore wind industry. Sebastian Barajas Ortiz is a master's student in offshore wind engineering and has co-led research on wind port electrification here in Salem. They're dedicated to conducting research that advances a just and equitable transition to renewable energy and places frontline communities, workers, and sustainability at the forefront. Here in Salem, they collaborated with SAFE to support the early conversations with community that supported expanded electrification capability at the terminal. They are young leaders who are walking the walk and doing the work. And so let me turn it over to you guys and Carlos with my thanks to all of you.
Carlos, oh, do a little clap there. That was amazing. I didn't get to introduce Carlos, and he gave me a page of notes for his introduction. Oh, no. So I'm just going to skim over what I love about Carlos. He and I met on a offshore wind certificate program, and I very quickly realized that this was somebody who was an expert in nearly everything around offshore wind. He knows the politics, he knows the boots on the ground, he understands the supply chain challenges because he was in New Bedford helping to develop that port. He is also, lucky us, he used to be a Salem resident, so he really understands both of our communities and the needs of both of our communities and the ports. He used to be at the New Bedford Ocean Cluster, and we're very lucky that he's now at the Environmental League of Massachusetts as the Community Development Director for offshore wind. So thank you, Carlos, for leading this conversation.
And folks, before I get too technical with the conversation, like the reason for me being here is not just because I represent ELM, but because of my close ties to the community. My nephew calls it the 1900s. In the late 1900s, I went to Bentley, right down the road, and I would see the large ships dropping off the coal, not knowing what's going on because I'm only a little third grader, not understanding that that's a power plant that doesn't necessarily have like the best impacts on the community, that lives within it. But additionally, my mom was a community organizer for the Salem Harbor CDC, so I spent lots of time in the Point neighborhood. We were one of the first murals that went up, so I'm very proud and happy to see that it's been transitioned over very recently. My connection to the community goes, going on 25 to 30 years. While I have moved away and I am supporting the work being done in New Bedford, I do so with an eye to help, the sons and daughters of my friends and family that still live up here in the North Shore. So with that said, the connection to the history of Salem is great, but I'm happy to be a part of what's to come in the future. Now, before we do that, I'd like to speak with Sebastian to talk about a little bit about the history itself of the port and some of the health impacts that we've been discussing.
Yeah, so as you said, the port used to be a coal-fired power plant. Before I start this, I wanted to say that the port really embodies the energy transition that we are progressing towards in the U.S. Port starts 1951 as a coal-fired power plant, and we see in 2014 it gets commissioned, and in 2018 we saw the combined cycle gas-powered plant come up. Now, we have the potential for the port to support and facilitate the build-out of clean energy, and while that is awesome for the port, and we see that the progress from coal to natural gas now going into facilitating clean energy, the tools and instruments that we use in order to build out that clean energy aren't necessarily clean. So there's a study done by the Harvard School of Public Health in 2000 that demonstrated the health impacts of the coal power plant. And that's over here to the left. And then on the right is a study done by the Impact Project. It analyzed the health impacts of ports and the movement of goods across the entire state of California. What we see is that both of these have health impacts about to the communities that they're in. And what we want to see in Salem is, yes, we want to see a transition to clean energy, but we don't want to see Salem bear the negative health impacts that ports bring to the city.
Awesome, thank you. Now, speaking of some of those impacts, what can be done to mitigate some of the issues that the vessels may have in the port? I know that I've heard of electrification. Is that something that you've been learning about?
Yes. So as we're doing across many industries in the U.S., we are trying to electrify. And within the ports themselves, there's kind of two sectors that you want to focus on, right? There is electrifying the vessels that come up and dock up and that are berthed at the ports. And then there's the actual on-site equipment that we can also electrify. Speaking more to electrifying the vessels, there's two aspects to this. And the main system in which we deliver and electrify the vessels is called shore power. Shore power systems are essentially the delivery system of electricity on the port side. So the port installs these shore power systems, and then on the other side, the vessel side, the ships actually have to retrofit or renovate their ships in order to be able to accept that electricity. And now, why do we need that electricity on the ships? Well, and I didn't know this when I started this project, vessels don't actually turn off their engines completely when they're at berth, right? So they run what's called their auxiliary systems at berth, which can be anything from leaving the lights on, running refrigerators, to even moving the big cranes on board in the offshore wind space. Now on the other side, on the on-site equipment, we see electrification through vehicles, electrifying cars that are on site, drayage trucks, pickup trucks, and then there's that electrification of the more niche equipment, specifically for offshore wind. That would be ring cranes and other equipment such as SPMTs, and you can also see this as electrifying forklifts for other container ports.
That's very interesting. Now, what other, aside from the Port of Long Beach, like where else do you see this happening?
Right, so there's a couple of really good examples that I studied specifically. I'm sure there's more, and my research wasn't completely expansive, but the Port of Long Beach is a really good example, specifically within the US, of electrification. And what we saw in the Port of Long Beach is that it took a really long time to electrify. They started in the early mid-2000s and have now seen huge reductions in emissions, 90% reductions in diesel particulate, over 97% reductions in sulfur oxides. And the majority of these, the electrification efforts at the Port of Long Beach have been through electrifying their equipment. So their forklifts, their drayage trucks, and any equipment that handles the containers that are at the Port of Long Beach. But one of the most important lessons that I took from studying the Port of Long Beach was their extensive government grants that really push the electrification efforts, not just at the Port of Long Beach, but throughout California, and throughout the 15 to 20 years that they've been electrifying, they've received over $600 million in government grants.
Now, it seems like it makes sense, you know, what's the barrier to this? I know it's happening all over. What's the barrier to do this in Salem?
Right, so specifically in the Port of Long Beach, they're benefiting a lot from the grants, as I said, and the backing of the government. But as we can tell from another example, Port Esbjerg, in the offshore wind specific case, offshore wind vessels and ships that serve the build out of offshore wind, they're quite niche compared to a container port that sees the same types of vessels coming in and out every single day. They see container vessels coming in and out, and a good example is also like a ferry, where you're running on a consistent schedule and you know exactly what type of vessel is coming in. When you're dealing with an offshore wind port, the vessels are more specified. There's a variety of different vessels, research vessels. There's huge vessels such as the one pictured on the screen. That's a WTIV, which has a crane on board, right? But Port Esbjerg also managed to electrify. And from studying them, I learned that they follow the standards created by these international bodies. They're called the IEC or IAE standards. And because of that, they see roughly 60 to 80% of the ships that are coming into their port plugging into the shore power systems that they have installed. And they've also seen great reductions in their emissions. Now, contrasting this, now I don't want to put down New Bedford at all. New Bedford was the first offshore wind port in the U.S. It's a huge facilitator in the build out and currently is working towards the build out of offshore wind. They have 2 shore power systems installed, but from my knowledge, no one has been able to plug into those shore power systems. And largely that's because of the lack of standardization that we have here in the US. We have a lot of European vessels coming in who use different voltages and different frequencies to US standards. So without those standards, there's a lack of compatibility between European vessels and the port. So without being able to actually plug into the shore power, it's deemed, I don't want to say useless, but it's not in use.
That's an effective No, yeah. It's less than useful right now. No, so in your experience, who do you think would have that authority to bring about those standards? Like, is it just the IEE, or is it something on the state level as well that could help us?
Right. So there's a lot of players within the offshore wind industry and a lot of ports that have to follow. Now I can't name a specific body that should be held responsible for upkeeping these standards, but what is important is that we learn from both of these entities, right? Both the Port of Long Beach and Port Esbjerg have important lessons that we see, right? The standardization that helped Port Esbjerg deal with the vast variety of vessels that it sees coming into its ports, and also in California, the backing of the government and the incentivizing of electrification and to clean up the ports and to reduce those emissions to help the health of the local communities.
Thank you. All right.
Now, to speak a little bit more on the specific challenges, more specifically to the shore power, as I've said, standardization is a large issue, and the cost is also one of the bigger issues, right? So that's where we see those 2 points of government incentives and standardizations helping. Now on the electrification of the actual equipment, what we see in the offshore wind industry specifically is that we have quite niche equipment, right? So these large cranes and SPMTs, some of this equipment is sort of one of a kind, right? There's not that many 3-ton cranes that can do the job that is required to build out offshore wind, right? So we have niche equipment which has to be electrified, and also equipment that has huge power requirements. So another big aspect of this is the ports actually having the power capacity to be able to fuel and run enough electricity to support the cranes and to support the heavy equipment that offshore wind needs. Now, just to summarize, I want to emphasize standardization. I want to emphasize cost, and more on the power requirements of the offshore wind industry. We spoke with National Grid during my time researching, and it's a complicated process, and National Grid is ever expanding. So early coordination with utilities is really important, and it's difficult to get enough power into the ports to fuel the electrification of this equipment. That's why planning these things out in the now is really, really important. In addition to this, I want to say that regional policy is extremely important, both in the case of cities like Salem, but also collaboration between different cities. From the vessel perspective, if I were a vessel owner, I would only be incentivized to retrofit or renovate my ship in order to accept power if I knew that all of the ports in which I was going to had the shore power systems in line and used the same standards for me to be able to plug into that power whenever I wanted and whenever I was at berth. Now, on the contrary, from the port's perspective, I want to make sure that all the vessels that are plugging into that are coming into my port are firstly able to plug into that shore power. And before I make $1 to $3 million investment, I want to make sure everyone's going to plug in and that our systems are aligned.
No, thank you. And as folks can see, like offshore wind has a lot of complexity. It's not just a political issue. Sometimes it is a systems issue, and you're going to learn really from Bridget real quick about supply chain issues regionally.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Sebastian. So I want to go back and start by talking about this transition that we've been discussing in Salem, right? Going from a coal plant to a natural gas plant. And of course, in speaking with Salem residents and Bonnie and SAFE, I really heard the enthusiasm for offshore wind, because if we build enough offshore winds, then that natural gas plant can be taken down one day. That's the ultimate goal. But I think that I want to just kind of talk about where we are as a country and a region on offshore wind, because certainly if we achieve this great energy transition, we can turn off the natural gas plant. But where we are now is quite far from where we need to be to make that happen. And yes, the Trump administration is openly hostile to offshore wind and to renewable energy. But even before that, in the Biden administration and the Trump one before that, we were quite behind. And this graph behind me shows kind of where we are now versus where we need to be, which is magnitudes more. Again, even before the second Trump administration, we were seeing a lot of project delays and cancellations in offshore wind, which just further delays our ability to take down fossil fuel plants. And one of the major causes of that, and to connect this to Sebastian's work and to Salem specifically, is the availability of ports and supply chain infrastructure. Without these ports, because of the nature of these giant structures that we're trying to build in the ocean, we can't build our projects. And so Salem is absolutely a part of that solution, but there also needs to be a lot more ports just like Salem and doing other pieces of the puzzle to get enough offshore wind in the entire East Coast and then the West Coast in order to decarbonize the entire country.
Thank you. Now, for folks watching and here in the room, you know, there's a term that's been used before. It's environmental justice and communities benefit agreements. Can you speak to some of those topics?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So I think we are not only concerned with shutting down the natural gas plant, right? That is a huge thing. Electrifying the port is really important. But as Sebastian said, we don't want Salem to bear the brunt of the next generation of energy technology, regardless of what that technology is. And so we can look in the offshore wind industry to understand where and how can the developers or the different companies or the government provide benefit to the communities that are living next to the infrastructure. And so I have a couple, just kind of two sort of examples or case studies up. One is, of course, Salem. We know that Salem and SAFE played a big role in this, won a community benefits agreement, that's a CBA, which included amounts of money for different provisions. But not every community is winning CBAs. Not everyone is brought along for the ride. Not everyone has a seat at the table. And even SAFE can tell you that to get a seat at the table takes a lot of work in and of itself. On the West Coast, we've seen tribes pushing back against offshore wind altogether because they felt like they had no say, and they went so far as to sue the federal government to stop offshore wind from happening. And so I mentioned CBAs. In the industry, kind of as it stands, they are sort of the only clear mechanism that is in play to send some sort of benefit to communities specifically. So Salem is included in that. And I don't think that that should be the only or the best way that we could do it. It just happens to be the only way we currently are. So I also think if that's the case, we should understand what communities are getting those funds. Is that distribution equitable? What's happening? And I think it's really interesting to look at the kind of spread in what towns or counties are getting money, how much they're getting, who isn't getting money, because I think it points to a larger issue, which closely related to what Sebastian is talking about and to what we're talking about with supply chain, which has to do with regional coordination, collaboration, and higher planning.
Okay. Now, putting you on the spot, like, what do you feel is a solution to all of this?
So, yeah, I think, as I just said, connecting what Sebastian talks about, what I talk about with supply chain, what we've talked about with environmental justice, I see a solution, and this is what I've studied as part of my work with SAFE. In short, public ownership, public power. And the reason for that is there's many reasons. At the end of the day, the system that we have is really fragmented. We have the federal government playing a role in some cases, and then we have all the different states trying to do their own thing. They're trying to bring the supply chain to their state. They're trying to buy the energy at the lowest cost. It's really disorganized, and I think that in that system, communities are lost. So I think if we have, again, everything that we've been talking about has been leading to me to the need for a higher level of planning, more centralized planning, essentially. What this could mean is more democratically governed entities. You could envision, for example, let's say it's a regional authority that is in charge of figuring out what ports we need to get us to 2050 to actually decarbonize. And in the meantime, they can also take care of port electrification. They can work on those standards that Sebastian's talking about. They can also have different, stakeholder tables where they are working with all of the communities where they have deemed we need to build a port. And I think that I like to talk about Amtrak and the USPS as great examples. these are not businesses, they are public services. And the government every year loses money on running these services, but they are nonetheless extremely important to everyday Americans. And I think that, to me, we could start to think about energy and offshore wind more like a public good and less as a business.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Before we transition to the next phase, I'd like to make sure we'll give a round of applause to Bridget and Sebastian, please. Thank you.
I just want to give a shout out to a few people in the room. We've got Lucy Corchado and Barbara Kelly right here. The two of them actually represented Salem in the negotiation of the community benefit agreement, and we're really grateful of them. They're now stuck going to quarterly meetings to observe that and make sure it's happening, and they're great spokespeople for our community. And also the SAFE board members who were part of this sleuthing journey that we went on with these incredible students. To really help guide that conversation and what we were hoping to get out of it. I have so much to say, but I guess I'll keep it moving because I want to allow questions. I do want to bring up Jordan Rogers. We are very lucky that we received some funding to work with the North Shore Labor Council this year. I gotta stay by the mic. When I first saw Jordan speak, I was like, oh, I hope I get to work with him one day, because he's really good at connecting all the dots. It's all the same fight, and I'm really excited to be working with labor. So Jordan, if you want to come up and say some things about the Labor Council and the importance of working with you.
Hello, everybody. So yes, thank you again for that introduction. Thank you to everyone at SAFE and for all of our speakers for putting on such a wonderful event. As Bonnie mentioned, I am going to try and zoom out a little bit and talk about the political implications of what we just heard and labor's perspective on what some of our pathways might be. So again, my name is Jordan Rogers. I'm the organizer for the North Shore Labor Council. We are a coalition of around 45 different unions across the North Shore in all different industries and sectors, coming together to advance our goal of economic and social justice. And we're extremely proud to have such strong ties with environmentalist groups like SAFE, because if you know anything about labor history, the labor movement hasn't always been the best environmentalists. So slowly but surely things are changing, and it's due to a lot of the great work from folks at SAFE and all of the organizers in the AFL-CIO who are dedicated to a just and green transition. But there still are some skeptics. I get asked by the bread and butter unionists, the folks that only care about wages and working conditions. I get asked, why should labor be involved in a green transition when we are struggling for wages to keep up with inflation, when our bosses are continually violating our contracts and stripping our rights away? Why should we add this one extra thing to what we're already doing? And I mean, the first answer is usually, in the end, climate change will come for all of us. But I find that answer doesn't resonate with people sometimes. It seems abstract. It's an issue for a later date and time. That might be something their kids or grandkids will have to worry about, but a lot of people are focused on just putting food on their table. So to that, I would respond, energy production and distribution absolutely matters in the here and now, because the climate crisis is here and it is now. And a few ways it affects us can be elucidated by just considering a couple facts. For one, consider the fact that our federal government is canceling so many green infrastructure projects, like issuing stop work orders on offshore wind terminals, at the same time that we are invading Venezuela and selling it off to the highest bidders in the oil industry. Those issues are necessarily connected. Let's also consider the issue of energy independence. That's something our government constantly talks about. I mean, Trump ran on it. Energy independence that, energy independence this. Yet, when energy independence is staring them in the face in the form of green renewable energy, they shrug their shoulders. They couldn't care less. Energy costs are rising. Our bills are getting more expensive every day. Yet when they have an opportunity to deliver a tangible promise that would relieve some of the stress on the American people, they go against their promise. Why would that be? I think the answer is very simple. I think our government cares more about the profits of their friends in the oil industry than they care for the affordability and survivability of working class Americans. Thank you. I think our government and the billionaire class use energy production as a cudgel against working class people. I think they wield it as a tool to wage class warfare against us. And I think if that's the case, I think we as working people need to wield it for ourselves. I think we need to advocate for true energy independence, the independence of working class people from the billionaire class. And I think there's a few ways to do that. We can continue to advocate for green energy infrastructure. We can continue to advocate for electrification, for revamping our power grid. At the same time, we can also advocate for public power, for regional or municipal ownership of energy. And we can also do this by organizing strategically those workers in the energy industry who will play such a pivotal role in this process. And lastly, I would also say that we need to take a principled internationalist position. We must connect our struggles here at home with those struggles happening abroad. Because personally, I voted for green renewable energy and therefore lower electricity bills. I did not vote to invade Venezuela. So that is part of the reason I am so excited that our Labor Council gets to work with SAFE and other environmentalist groups to continue to organize around this issue. As Bonnie said, we are partnering to put on a series of events across the North Shore that will advocate for working class people to understand the economics and politics behind why offshore wind is being attacked. More details to come on that. For now, all I would ask is for your support and your continued advocacy and discussion about these issues. Don't let them put this on the back burner. Don't let people stop caring about it. Keep fighting every single day. Thank you.
Okay, with that, I know, it's gonna be fun. With that, we have actually plenty of time for questions. I have to kick you all out at 8, and we have to be strict about that because the folks in the camera booth need to go home, and we love them and we want them to keep doing this with us. So, you got plenty of time. Carlos, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, any questions from the audience? Yes.
Where is Brookhaven and how did they get 170 million?
That's a good question.
Yeah,
benefits?
they are on Long Island, and they are, I think, a point of interconnect to the grid. I think it's really interesting. A lot of the very, very wealthy communities on the Hamptons are getting a lot more money, and I think it's not surprising. It takes time, takes effort, it takes having the capacity to show up and fight for your community.
Yes.
Yeah, my question has to do with the wind power that we have on land. There are many states that do this. Are they in the same boat, literally, as we are? Are they a group that we can work with to advocate for power, green power?
Yeah, so there are many states that have onshore wind, and you'd be surprised that the majority of them are what were considered red states. So Texas is the state that leads the nation in installed onshore power, but you wouldn't know that if you only listen to the news. You would think that this is something that only Democrats practice. So there are certainly other communities that we can tap into, and I'd be happy to follow up with you with a resource through SAFE, so folks can get in contact with some of those states. My goal is to bring up those talking points directly in community to make sure that this stops being a partisan issue, because it's not. This is an American issue. We all want, reliable energy at an affordable rate, and it shouldn't be, Democrat, Republican. It's American. So I have a question for the audience. So is there a topic that you would have wanted us to touch on that maybe we didn't, or maybe you want some more specificity on what we discussed tonight?
There's a hand in the very back.
The question becomes, are we foolish in thinking ahead that we will eventually get this? We're not foolish, I know that, because we always have to think ahead. But it's gonna be many years down the
Correct.
line.
Correct. It's almost like the mentality of like the boats being plugged into shore power. They're on like a hot standby. Like, so it's not just the auxiliaries, but it's also like the pumps and the engines are ready to go in case you have to unplug and get going. Our community is unfortunate enough to stay in that same mindset. It's unfortunate that mindset comes with a price tag, where there has to be some additional investments to keep things moving. And the community I live in now in New Bedford, they did do that. You know, initially they went supporting Cape Wind. They built out the port with the CEC. That project did not happen. However, the Clean Energy Center kept sustaining and doing operations on that facility. While it was not maximizing the potential, it was doing something to keep relevant. And then when Vineyard Wind showed up, they've been ready to meet the demand. They've actually expanded the site. So that way, when the next wave hits, they'll be ready to take on the additional projects. Yeah. It's in the back row, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I just really wanted to have a better idea of like, so what's going on at the physical site here in Salem now? I mean, we technically broke ground. Everybody came out and they put on the shovels and they dug. But do we have, I mean, do we have some type of timeline? Is there anything that's going to be happening? Is there any projects that can be happening in the meantime? Is there anything like, yeah.
Yeah, so, do I need to go by the mic? Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. We don't have like a great answer for that, but you know what?
I understand that nobody has a great answer for anything today.
We're gonna put that on a sticker. That's awesome.
So, I mean, I think the short of it is, you know, one of the big difficulties that we had over this past year was $34 million got taken out of the project. That's a really difficult thing to make up, even in the span of a few months, you know? So, you know, part of the path forward is trying to figure out, you know, is there, you know, a different type of redesign that we could do? You know, is there phasing that we can do? And trying to assess those questions is, I think, really where the port's at right now. You know, and so as we move forward, we're trying to resolve those questions, I think, quickly as quickly as possible, but still making sure we're being diligent, you know, about the way we are answering those questions is very important too.
And Daniel, is it true that even if we built it, is there offshore wind project we could support?
Yeah, you know, I think if you take a look at New Bedford, for example, not to, you know, calling them without understanding the scope of their operations totally, but if you take a look at New Bedford right now, they're thinking about, you know, the future and, you know, how are they going to, you know, kind of bridge the gap between the next projects that's going to come after, you know, Vineyard Wind. So, you know, that's a good question too, right? You know, is like, you know, what does the project pipeline look like? And, you know, you need the project pipeline in order for a port to be useful. You know, but there's also, like I was saying kind of in my introductory remarks, was, you know, we're also trying to take a look at the potential for kind of interim uses to make sure that, you know, if we were to build a port, right, you know, not if, but when we build the port, you know, if we were to build it now, you know, would that be something that we could, you know, fill, you know, the berth up, you know, to make it a worthwhile investment at this very moment. So hopefully that's helpful.
No, that is helpful. A little bit of a follow-up on that. So I know that that our brothers and sisters to the north of us, our dearest friends and greatest neighbors ever, the Canadians, have like a lot of interest in offshore wind, especially in the Gulf of Maine as well. Is there any types of talks or conversations or thoughts or anything about Salem being able to help service, say, you know, support Nova Scotia's efforts or, you know, something along those lines?
Right, yeah, no, I know, you know, Canada's really taken off. I don't know too much about it, so I can't really like delve into a good answer to that question, but, you know, I think one of the things that it comes down to is the business case for it, right? You know, steam time for a vessel to go, you know, from here to Martha's Vineyard is not, you know, it's not bad. There's a business case for that. Going to the Gulf of Maine, Salem to Gulf of Maine, there's a business case for that. You know, I think, you know, certainly, you know, there's consideration for, you know, places like Canada, but the steam time to that is going to be quite different. And I don't, frankly, candidly, I don't know what the business case would look like for supporting, you know, Canadian offshore wind efforts. And I think too, Canada is also, on a timeline, they still have to, I believe, catch up, to where the U.S. was getting to. And, with the support of administration up there, I'm sure they probably will. But, there's also a timing issue to that as well. And so, looking towards the future, I think it's probably fair to say that, things like that, and considering how we can support not just New England projects, but broader projects would be on the table, I would imagine. So
I just want to hang with that more than I want to hang with the people.
not going to speak to that.
I keep trying to make eye contact with our friend in Swampscott who works for Avangrid and knows ports. I don't know if there's anything you're trying to hide from me, aren't you? Is there anything you want to share on that point?
Well, I can't really comment too much about that. We have interests associated with those, but I'm Professor Jay from Tufts University and teach with Dr. Hines and Case Garnick in the offshore wind program. And these are a couple of my students that have been working on this. I'm very, very proud and exceptional work that they have done. I did want to bring up one question that I thought maybe someone in the audience might bring up, and key on something Sebastian said partway through his discussion, and that is that a lot of these ports are having difficulties with the electrification because of a lack of power at the port. And you may say, if you live in Salem, wait a minute, because I said this when they brought this to me, and I said, hold on a second. There's a power plant on the port. How can it be that there's not enough power at the port to support electrification? And the answer, as everything else is very complicated, and I think it underscores how complicated this whole industry is and how complicated the energy transition is that we're all working through. This is something that we have to, we got to fight the good fight and keep doing it. But Sebastian, or do you want to give the answer to that question? Because I remember hearing it back in the day when we were studying this, and I thought, okay, I get it, but isn't that interesting?
Yes, the answer is that I got from National Grid is that it's complicated. Firstly, it's a peaker plant, so it's not designed to run 24/7, and other than that, the loads that are being supplied at the port aren't exactly constant. So I think the best bet, if we were to supply local power to the port, would be some type of local generation, whereas the peaker plant is more designed to supply into the grid and supply a lot of different end uses, and wasn't exactly designed to, for a big crane to plug in 2 hours a day.
Also, just to add to that really quick, like trying to electrify a port is just the same problem as electrifying anything else. Right now, we are seeing very sharp increases in projected electricity demands. You've definitely heard of data centers as one major cause of that. We need to build up the grid to account for all of this new electricity flow. There are shortages in grid components. There are shortages in transformers and distribution equipment. So ports are just another symptom of a larger issue in the grid right now.
Yeah, for a bit more context, it's like 2 to 3 year wait on just a transformer. And
it's up to like 6 now, I think.
Oh wow.
And where do they mostly come from? Is it Korea they're manufactured, or?
There's mostly abroad. Yeah. The U.S. market accounts for 20% of transformers, and they are all completely booked up.
Wow.
Jeez.
I have a quick question on that. I was curious, kind of similar to what you were thinking about with the existing plant there, but also is there potential land for storage and solar, especially with storage as such an important component for helping with peak demand, whether or not the site could have solar and storage that goes directly to the full grid or directly to the port's needs?
That's a great question.
It's a great question. From my knowledge, having a battery and then like generation on site, the Port of Los Angeles is a really good example. They have a microgrid on site, and that powers their like drayage trucks, that powers forklifts and some of the equipment that they have running there. An important thing to note there is that they have hundreds of acres of land compared to our 43.5 acres. Mm-hmm. So their generation capabilities are way higher than ours, and just their acreage is larger to set up those battery systems and to allot acreages of land for those systems to be put in place.
Hi, I teach at MIT planning, but I've been in New York City government, and most of my work is in New York, and the Red Hook community is devastated by, Trump's decision, because much of Brooklyn was really looking forward to those jobs and looking for, it was really hopeful. And now people feel like they got punched in the gut. And I also know the Shinnecock tribe in Long Island is trying to get some of that $100-some million because it's more likely those transmission wires will go through the reservation than they will through those $30 million homes, and so the tribe's really involved. But in my mind, and I also worked in the South Bronx with a class this last year because there are 4 peaker plants there which are polluting the neighborhood, and there are 6,000 diesel trucks a day going in and out of Hunts Point Market there, and asthma rates are 30 to 40 times the national average in that community, which is also the poorest urban neighborhood in the United States. So the point I'm getting to is I think public involvement is like key to everything. And when I look across all these places, because listening to here, which is great, but it sounds like I'm in Brooklyn. It sounds like we're facing the exact same thing. And everywhere I go, though, the only folks who I see have the networks and capacity to maybe help bring us together is the labor movement. And so I wanted to ask the young man from the labor movement, because there were hundreds of central labor councils and 72 unions at least involved in the AFL. What can be done to get you on the road in the labor movement, or to get labor more playing a leading role in helping to bring us together? That's really my question.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you. And I think there are some constraints holding the labor movement back, but overall I think we are heading in the right direction. Historically, as I alluded to, there have been a lot of labor unions who are against any kind of green energy transition. I don't want to call them out specifically, but some folks in the building trades, other key industries like that. But I think the AFL-CIO overall has done a great job in moving towards seriously considering the green transition. Us here in Massachusetts, our AFL Federation created a climate jobs department specifically for the purpose of uniting the labor movement and the environmentalist groups working towards a common cause. Not every state has a program like that, but I think that can be a model for other states, especially in red areas, to start to combine those efforts. So you get more green conscious people into the labor movement, we slowly make this change. And I would also posit that as we see more effects of climate change start to affect working class people, hopefully, ideally, there will be a greater sense of urgency to work towards that solution. We may not see that, ideally we would, but hopefully more folks entering the labor movement will have that mindset. I hope that answers your question.
No, thank you.
Ben, did you bring someone from New Bedford that?
Look at this guy.
Everyone else is not today.
On that note, actually, John Morse, Millwright, Local 1121. I spent 6 months down in New Bedford doing pre-assembly, loading components onto barges and doing all that. There are a lot more younger people joining up into the unions that already have a more progressive mindset about climate change and green energy, and they're looking at it directly affecting their quality of life. the ability to put food on their table, to support their families, and I think that's a positive direction to look in, especially with in the past 10, 15 years, more of the push to put younger people into the trades and into, craft services, things like that, and a good majority of them are realizing in their early 20s that going union early in life is a great way to go. And so a lot of them are already coming with that positive attitude and,
Are you still working in New Bedford?
No, I left late October.
Oh, okay. It wasn't because of stop work orders?
No, it wasn't, no.
Hey, you mentioned something that interests me, is the funding for like offshore and things like that. And you use Amtrak as an example, and that's a terrible source because they're at the whim of Congress. And then versus we have a highway system that's state and federal funding. Is there any way, any ideas that you folks are kicking around for funding?
Yeah, that's the ultimate question, right? If in the meantime, we talked with Bonnie a lot about, on one hand, we have the next 3 years to plan, and we have the next 3 years to envision what we want to fight for in the next administration. On the other, to build, we mentioned a regional authority. In order to create that also requires Congress. I do think states could come together. States, no state could build a project on their own, probably just based on the amount of dollars you need, but states could elect to come together. It's just hard to talk about an official federal or state entity without Congress, unfortunately. But they could, and I think again, right now, like what we see happening. When we see ICE and DHS and the military get a lot more money, that money's coming out of the grid, healthcare, education. So I think this is part of the conversation that we should be having. I don't think it's a little pie in the sky, but it's not out of question to say that the next administration should put significant amounts of money toward the renewable energy transition.
It's so fun working with Bridget because how it's going right now, it's crumbling, it doesn't work, and so we have no other choice, in my opinion, that like we have to build new worlds. We have to think big because there's no other option.
Could I just ask, is a model like, we use the acronym RGGI, but I believe that's the New England Electric. Anyway, they basically, well, I'm sure you can explain better than what they do, but it seems to me that's a model for regional coordination, and it also has some funding stuff built in, right? If people don't meet those goals, then the money goes to Massey's. So is that something to be built on further for funding?
Absolutely. I think you're referring to the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. Admittedly, I don't have a perfect answer. I think that's something that someone has mentioned to me before. I think it absolutely deserves more study. I wish I had a better answer. I don't know if either of you have thoughts on that.
I think Professor Kate Garnick might
Yeah.
have an answer for that.
So it's a Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. It's not only New England, it's up and down the East Coast. It was created to share, it's almost like a cap and trade system where power plants have to, emitting greenhouse gases have to, lower the level, and they have to pay if they're unable to do it. It's highly political. States will leave and come into the RGGI based on who their governors are. So, it's an interesting model. I was also thinking when you talked about regional cooperation. There are many regional cooperation areas in New England, and we work as New England very closely together. So I think that rather than create a new organization, we can try to see how we can make some of our existing organizations, more focused on these issues. I think to create a new bureaucracy won't be a good thing, but to sharpen some of our current interactions in the New England region is probably a better approach. And then figure out how to pay for it. And we can't impose new costs on the electric utilities because who pays for that in the long run? So, you know, again, where is that federal money coming from? So let's figure out some innovative financing. That would be the way.
Oh my God, are we ending on time?
I think we're good.
Any other questions?
The port in Denmark, how are they electrifying? They have a nuclear power plant, or they just have a whole bunch of wind, or?
Yeah, so they have wind coming back and connecting back to the port itself. I mean, it's just like a perfect example of like what we would want to be, but they have on-site generation, they have biofuel on-site. It's not just an offshore wind port, so they service multiple industries, but yeah, they have renewable generation coming in from the ocean, coming in from land. Yeah.
Thank you.
While we touch on the European piece, I'll get a little bit nerdy and technical here. You mentioned that part of the problem is the lack of uniformity in the voltage and the frequencies, and that we don't quite know who would be the ones to make that universal, but it certainly sounds like part of that is ships coming over from Europe with a different system, and then also US ships having different systems. Is there discrepancy between the ships coming from Europe themselves and the ships here themselves, or is it we've got two systems and we need to figure out a way to serve them both, or is it kind of we've got a smattering of different ones and we have to figure out how to set a universal standard?
So yes, there is a lot of different systems. Europe, I guess, abides by this like international standard. So I wouldn't so much call it the European system. Another big issue is that the American vessels aren't retrofitted because they're especially on the East Coast, no one's forced to plug into shore power, right? Part of the reason why California had so much success is not only did they have a lot of money going into their electrification efforts, but they have an on-berth shore power requirement, meaning that something like 80% of the vessels by a certain date have to be plugging into shore power, which forces the vessels to retrofit their systems in order to accept that power, no matter how that power comes.
Seems like it would be easier to dictate when you have that much of the coastline in one state.
Yeah,
So
precisely.
would a regional approach then across all New England states perhaps help incentivize that to help retrofit vessels?
That's what would be best, right? You don't, as a vessel owner, I wouldn't want to retrofit unless I know that every port that I go to, I can plug into. Otherwise, you know, I'm gonna run on my bunker fuel. I'm gonna run my auxiliary engines.
Yeah, so it needs that coalition power.
Yes.
Cool. Thank you.
Is it possible to, like with electricity, you know, just sort of, household electricity, if you go to Europe, you put a little adapter in?
Yeah.
The thing is there some version of that?
So, you know, funny you say that. He told me that.
Yeah, so if you go aboard the European vessels, it's like you're going to Europe. You have to bring those adapters properly.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
I can't answer that question like full fact, but I do know that the frequencies and the voltages matter, right? So like sometimes when you like go and plug in your laptop, your MacBook, your iPad into the European system, it's going to get too much energy or too little energy, and the voltages might mess up the system. So I'm not an electrical engineer, but I think it's more than just the cables themselves. Yeah.
What did Long Beach do? Because you said Long Beach has an international, so how did they get everyone onto one?
So Long Beach has the benefit of having the same vessels coming in and out all the time. So they have this, like the container ships that are coming in on an hourly basis, right? So they can build their system specific to a specific type of ship, specific type of load, whereas in offshore wind, we serve many types of ships, which is why we need that standardization across all of our ships. in order to accept that power.
Jamie?
Yeah, thank you. So Sebastian, this might be a question for you, or it might be for you, Daniel. Thinking about being prepared, you know, we heard Joe St. Pierre say that they would be ready to rock and roll as soon as we got a green light. And thinking about electrification for the port, as I recall it, there were discussions about bringing a substation to the port here in Salem to be able to provide that electrical power for ship-to-shore power. Are we working behind the scenes with National Grid? You know, you said that it's 6 years to get a transformer. So is that work happening right now so that we can be ready to rock and roll when it's time to go? I mean, the issues of electrification and the vessels in there, and you know, plugs not being ready, that's that aside.
I mean, I think the short answer is no, I don't know, but you make an excellent point that this is a great opportunity to be thinking about support.
Part of the community benefits agreement is looking at seaport electrification, and it's really put on Crowley to do that work, and it's part of the CBA working group's responsibility to monitor Crowley and make sure that they're doing what, you know, they have said they would do in the CBA.
Wonderful. So then my next question as a follow-on would be, how can we at SAFE and we community members help support the CBA committee to push to make sure that Crowley is having that conversation with National Grid so that then there's some pressure to, you know, keep those gears moving?
So we publish the CBA working group, which I'm staff to the CBA working group. I'm not on the CBA working group, but the CBA working group meets quarterly, and you know, in those quarterly updates, you get you know, updates from Crowley and everything that we, on annual basis, there's also an annual update, you know, a larger kind of compilation of everything, and you know, it's really incumbent upon, you know, the working group to continue to ask those questions and make sure that, you know, we're looking at the CBA working group to ensure it's being fulfilled fully. But you know, in terms of like how you can connect with that work, you know, so I would say, you know, you can always take a look on the city website, on the Crowley website, the CBA, you know, quarterly I say, hey Joe, you know, we got this all done, it's wrapped up, I'm gonna put it on our website, please put it on your website. So, you know, you can stay in touch with the information that way. I think this is probably going to be one of your best pathways. I know that the two community liaisons, community representatives, so we have, you know, I know they were chosen because of their, you know, which neighborhoods, you know, they're ascribed to. One is historic Derby Street neighborhood, and one is the Point neighborhood. So that was a large factor. But the other factor behind it was, you know, just you know, making sure these people have been involved in the process to that point. So, and I know those individuals are also, you know, affiliated with SOA. So, you know, I know there's some ties there, and you have good access to those individuals so that they can continue to, you know, advocate for, you know, their communities.
And they have. Yes.
Yes.
that I know. Thank you. Tirelessly.
Yeah, I don't know better fighters than Lucy Corchado and Barbara Kelly. When Barbara Kelly found out this information, she wrote to the CEO of National Grid a personal letter. So
He responded.
he did?
He did. He's British. He's they published the email of their CEO, so I said, why not? And he did. He responded.
So I think, you know, we're a community that's ready to fight for what we need, and I mean, this is why working with Tufts is so critical. Like we're foaming at the mouth, we're ready to go, we want to fight, but we have to do it smart. And so getting this information, you know, we were like, well, we can't do port electrification, why? And they worked with us to figure that out, and the steps that are possible and who to talk to. So it's just an incredible group to be working with. I wanted to have Carlos close us because he's had a window into our future, right? Who knows when this is going to happen, but he's seen it happen in New Bedford.
Yeah.
And he's told me that in some ways we're at an advantage if we can think positively for a bit.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I'd love him to talk about
No, for sure, and like, it is difficult to sort of like, let's put some more positive spins. You feel like you're a top, right? I was like, no, I'm done with the spin. But in all honesty, I think it's a great opportunity for communities like Salem in particular to learn, you know, and start establishing best practices. Like come to the community in Bedford, you know, connect with all the stakeholders within the supply chain that I've helped develop. You know, we can sort of show you where things worked, where they didn't work, and I think you guys have a great head start with your community benefit agreement, whereas we don't have one in New Bedford. We just happen to be benefiting by proxy, where by location, right? They're there. You know, we benefit in terms of services, like the tax revenue that's coming into the community, but there was nothing ironclad that said that New Bedford had to get anything from this. We just happen to be in a great position to support the industry. But in terms of like opportunity, like I've been over to Europe, and they, in particular Northeast England, where it's the Port of Blythe, and they're looking at us from like with 25 to 30 years of experience, and they're like, yeah, this is all growing pains. Like, we were crazy too, but now oil and gas, you know, wind, they all work together. They all utilize the similar, pretty much the same crews. They can jump from vessel to vessel. These are all transferable skills. I think folks in labor can speak on that, where, you know, they're looking to learn transferable skills to work on multiple projects, multiple vessel types, et cetera. So I think, you know, we just have to hold on. You know, we can all stick together. I think the regional approach will be best, although we all compete amongst ourselves in terms of like city to city. Ultimately, I think the regional approach will be what keeps us afloat during this. Thank you. We're good to go. Let's go.
Everyone, on your way out, there's a flyer about our next event on February 9th about relocation and coastal resilience. Look forward to seeing you there if you can make it.
There is a report out if you want to read more about port electrification.
Yeah.
Yes, look up Tufts Osprey port electrification.
And yours?
Oh, yeah, if you want to read about public offshore wind, you can search Climate and Community Institute Offshore Wind.
We'll put that in a newsletter.
Thank you.
Very cool. Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you.